Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's lecture. Tonight's lecture is by Nigel Henderson, who is a history graduate of Queen's University in Belfast and a member of the History Hub Ulster. He has been involved in a number of research projects for councils and museums in Northern Ireland, as well as carrying out research on a variety of personal projects. One of these projects is documenting war fatalities that were buried or commemorated in graveyards in Ulster. He currently has over 6,000 entries in his archive, which includes civilian fatalities from the Second World War. Tonight's talk relates to Nigel's war-related graves in Ulster project, as Nigel brings us details of men from countries in mainland Europe who died in the two world wars and were buried in Ulster. If anyone has any questions that they'd like to ask Nigel in relation to tonight's lecture, if you just want to pop it into the chat box and I'll bring it to Nigel at the end. And we welcome Nigel and we hand it over to him now. Thanks a million. Thanks, Nigel.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Anne-Marie. I couldn't have said it better myself. Thank you all for joining us this evening to hear about some of the people from European countries who died during the two world wars and are buried in Ulster. And by Ulster, of course, I include the 9 counties, not the 3 counties. So there's 30 war fatalities who were born in 8 different European countries and are buried in graveyards in Ulster. Some of the bodies have been repatriated to their homelands, but most still lie at rest in Ulster. 4 were from the Great War and the remainder from the Second World War, which is to be expected because Ulster or Northern Ireland was a base for a lot of people from different European countries who had to flee their own lands and wanted to join in the fight against Nazi Germany. One of the fatalities that we'll be talking about was born in Sweden, 1 in Italy and 1 in Belgium. 3 were born in France and 3 were born in Norway. 6 were born in the Netherlands and 15 were Polish nationals. Of course, a lot of them would have been born before Poland became a nation state again after the First World War. So I'm using the term Polish nationals rather than born in Poland. I'll be dealing with the Great War fatalities first and then the Second World War fatalities. And when I move on to the Second World War, I'm going to be dealing with fatalities within the national group and then in chronological order. And I'm going to apologize from the outset for mangling the pronunciation of some of the names of the fatalities. At the bottom of this screen, I've included 3 websites that I have used in preparing this talk. wartimeni.com is owned and run by a guy from Belfast called Scott Edgar. And there's a lot of different aspects to the information that he has in there, including details about American forces, details about accidents, details about this, that, and the other. The other website, or the second website on the list there, is RAF Commands, which is a great website for the Second World War for identifying details of how RAF personnel died. I think they have causes of death or circumstances of death for something like 95% of the RAF fatalities from the Second World War, and that includes people who died on the home front as well as people who died on more active service. The ones where they are lacking information tend to be the ones where people died after discharge. So people who had maybe contracted tuberculosis or some other condition from which they subsequently died. The final one down at the bottom there, www.irishaviation.com, is owned and run by a guy from Dublin called Dennis Burke. And as the name implies, it concentrates on RAF or Air Force crashes in era during the Second World War. So moving on to the first one. In early 1917, 2 American shipping companies decided to challenge the German U-boat menace by sending unarmed merchant ships into the war zone to deliver provisions and machinery to Europe. The vessels were the SS Orleans and SS Rochester. SS Rochester was built at the Great Lakes Engineering Works in Michigan in 1912 and was called SS Jaguez until 1916. Her name changed to Rochester when she was bought by the Kerr Steamship Company of New York. The Rochester was captained by Karl Erich Kokeritz, and it left New York on 10th February and made it safely to the estuary on the River Gironde on the west coast of France by early March. The newspaper image shows the ship arriving at France. When the ship docked, there were up to 30,000 people waiting, and Kokeritz and the crew were hailed as heroes. For their courage, the crewmen were awarded a certificate, and Captain Kokeritz was awarded a specially commissioned silver medal by the President of France. On 2nd April of the same year, America declared war on Germany in response to the rising toll in sunken American merchant shipping and civilian casualties. In June, Kokeritz and the SS Rochester made another successful return journey to Europe. And for the Rochester's third trip, she had been converted to an armed merchant cruiser with a 3-inch gun on each of the fore and after decks, along with a machine gun at amidships. On 2nd November 1917, on the return journey from Manchester to Baltimore in ballast, US Rochester was torpedoed and sunk by the German submarine U-95, and that took place 300 miles west of Tory Island. 23 lives were lost, but several men, including the ship's master, spent 5 days in an open lifeboat, with fresh water having run out after 4 days. The survivors were picked up by a British vessel and taken to Londonderry, where they received treatment for exposure and frostbite at the city infirmary. The men were provided with accommodation at the Sailors' Rest, which was run by the British and Foreign Sailors Society, whilst Captain Karl Erich Kokeritz took a room at the City Hotel on Foyle Street, where he died of a combination of meningitis and pleurisy on the 4th of February 1918 at the age of 43. So obviously his experience of being in an open boat, being in the water, affected his health to the degree that he developed pleurisy. His funeral took place from the City Hotel in Derry to Derry City Cemetery 2 days after his death, with full naval and military honours in a plot purchased by the US consulate. The coffin was placed on a gun carriage and draped with the Stars and Stripes and the Union flag. Although he was born in Sweden, as I'll come to in a minute, he had emigrated to the United States and was regarded as being a United States citizen. The band of the 3rd Battalion Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers, which was stationed at Ebrington Barracks in the city, led the cortege. A naval detachment and members of the Royal Irish Constabulary attended the funeral, and amongst those walking behind the gun carriage were the US consul, the Swedish consul, the president of the Sailors' Rest, and the owner of the City Hotel. However, Captain Kokeritz lay in an unmarked grave until a simple white cross was erected by the Friends of Derry City Cemetery in 2021, so just over 2 or 3 months ago. Karl Erich Kokeritz was born on 18th May 1874 at Gavleborg in Sweden to Edvard Gustav Kokeritz and Sophia Salholm, and he had emigrated to the United States in 1894. You can see there the cross, and along with some basic details about them, there's the cross flags of Sweden and the United States. So it's quite ironic that whilst his funeral got a lot of coverage at the time and was attended by the US consul and the Swedish consul, and I understand that the US consul had purchased the plot where he was laid to rest, there was no memorial erected by the US consul or the Swedish consul. And this plain, simple white cross, over 100 years after his death, was erected by a local historical society. Much of the information that I've used came from an article published in the Derry Journal on 5th November 2021 to coincide with the publication of a book by David Jenkin entitled Captain Cockeritz, an American Hero. Personally, I would regard him as being Swedish because that's where he was born, but Swedish American would do for me. In 1908, the Workman Clark shipyard commenced the construction of a new ship, yard number 278, for the Orient Steam Navigation Company, and it was to be used on the UK-Australia route. Ship 278 was named SS Atranzo and was launched on 27th March 1909, completed in July of the same year, and made her maiden voyage on the 1st of October 1909. SS Atranto was requisitioned by the Admiralty on 4th August 1914 and was converted to become an armed merchant cruiser, being fitted with 8 4.7-inch guns. By 1918, she was being used as a troop ship to ferry troops from North America, as well as to and from France. HMS Atranzo was the flagship for convoy HX-50, which departed New York on 25th September 1918. There was an accidental collision with a French fishing schooner called La Coisin off Newfoundland 6 days later. Atranzo stopped to rescue the 37 survivors. The convoy then encountered a force 11 gale in the North Channel, and HMS Atranzo collided with another troop ship called Kashmir, which was also a liner converted, on the morning of 6th October 1918. The best estimate of the casualty total from the disaster is nearly 470 men, including 358 American Army personnel and 6 French fishermen. The Commonwealth War Graves Commission records 94 fatalities for HMS Atranzo on 6th October, 49 from the Mercantile Marine Reserve, 35 Royal Naval personnel, and 10 men from the Royal Marine Light Infantry. Local newspapers reported that HMS Mounsey rescued 300 American troops, 266 of the Atranto crew, 1 YMC morale officer, and 30 French fishermen. The survivors were brought to Belfast, but 3 of the French sailors succumbed to pneumonia at the Belfast Union Workhouse Infirmary and were subsequently buried in Milltown Roman Catholic Cemetery in the city. Seaman Jean-Marie Bougier was staying at the Catholic Seamen's Institute in Dock Street before being admitted to the infirmary, and he died on the 11th of October 1918 at the age of 16. Seaman Guillaume Denier was also staying at the Catholic Seamen's Institute, and he was admitted with influenza, and he died on 13th October 1918, age 35. And Seaman Louis-Francois Chalon was staying at the Belfast Sailors and Soldiers Service Club in Waring Street before being admitted to the infirmary with influenza, and he died on 21st October 1918, aged 17. The 3 men are all buried in the same grave, and Sir William Coates, who was Lord Mayor of Belfast, unveiled a memorial at the plot in November 1921. I've got a newspaper photograph of the Celtic cross as it originally was, with carved panels and a dove of peace as the centerpiece. The very detailed inscription names the men and their ages and the background to their deaths. So it records that Otranto collided with La Coisin and so forth. And the end of the inscription records, "This memorial has been erected by sympathetic Ulster Friends of France. At some stage over the intervening years, the memorial has been damaged, and all that remains is the base with the inscription and a small portion of the shaft of the cross, as you can see in the color image." The inscriptions are all still legible. There are some spelling anomalies of the names, but in essence, they're still legible. I don't know whether the damage was vandalism or whether it was just that wear and tear, perhaps hit by lightning, something like that. It's impossible to say, but the beautiful cross that was there in 1921 is now essentially lost to history. So that takes us to the end of the First World War portion, only 4 fatalities from the First World War. So moving on to the Second World War, on 11th June 1945, Captain Raymond Dengus of the Belgian Army was riding a motorbike through Carrickfergus when he swerved to avoid a dog that had run into the road. He crashed into the wall of a blacksmith shop at Northgate and was taken to the 24th London General Hospital, which was based at Campbell College in Belfast. He died of his injuries later the same day at the age of 33 and is buried in Milltown Roman Catholic Cemetery following a requiem mass at St Columkille's Roman Catholic Church at Ballyhackamore in East Belfast. The service was led by the Reverend Father Fitzgibbon, a British Army chaplain, and the celebrant was Reverend Joseph Sonneville, a Belgian Army chaplain from Ghent. Captain Dengus was survived by a wife and child living at Spa in Belgium. His burial plot is now marked with a CWGC Commonwealth War Graves Commission memorial relating to 3 men from the Pioneer Corps who died during the German air raids in 1941 and are buried in another plot in the cemetery. It can be assumed that the body of Raymond Dengus was exhumed and repatriated to Belgium after the war, and that's how the Commonwealth War Graves have been able to reuse that plot to a certain extent to commemorate the 3 men from the Pioneer Corps. That's a newspaper image of the funeral. So you can see there was a very large turnout from the Belgian soldiers who were training in Northern Ireland at that time. Moving on, you'll see at the top I've got the Stovage Facebook group and their Facebook address, because a lot of the information I'm using in this segment comes from their page, but also from other sources. The SS Stovage set sail from Sydney in Nova Scotia on 22nd November 1940 as part of convoy SC-13, carrying a cargo of steel and bound for Glasgow. During a fierce storm, she was wrecked on the rocks off Tory Island with the loss of 10 men. The Arundora lifeboat conducted a rescue operation in terrible weather conditions, bringing the remaining 18 crewmen safely to Burton Port. 3 of the bodies recovered from the sea were buried in St Anne's Church of Ireland graveyard at Killalt, Tullagobegly, and I thought the Polish names were bad, Tullagobegly in County Donegal. In addition to the men's names, dates and places of birth and dates of death, the plaques on each of the memorial bear the words Gevallen in dienst van zijn Vaterland. So apologies again for my poor Dutch pronunciation, which loosely translates as fallen in the service of his fatherland. Some online translations render Vaterland as homeland, which is probably just a wee bit of political correctness going on there. So those are the 3 headstones that were erected at the plot where those men were buried. And the source of those photographs is Sean Wilson. The bodies were exhumed on 9th October 2000 by the Netherlands War Graves Foundation and reinterred at the Nationaal Ereveld War Cemetery at Loenen in the Netherlands. The original memorials remain in the graveyard along with a plaque commemorating the repatriation of the bodies. Eelt Hendrik Borgman was born on 29th July 1893 at Nieuwe Pekela in Groningen to Jacob Klaas Borgman and Theresia Maria Bakker, and he married Martha Hulda Forster on 26th November 1919 in Rotterdam. He was the cook on the ship and he was 43 years old. Johannes Bruin, and there's various spellings of his surname, was born on 29th December 1900 at Maassluis in Zuid-Holland to Willem Heer Bruin and Gertrude Montenich. And he was a stoker and was 39 years of age. And the third man to die was Antonius Andrianus Theodorus Hofkins, who was born on 12th May 1909 at Voorburg in Zuid-Holland. And he also was a stoker and was 21 years of age. So it's great that in the Dutch, and indeed, as we'll see later, the Norwegian headstones, they include the date of birth as well as the date of death, unlike Commonwealth war graves, which just has the date of death. This is a photograph of the men of the lifeboat who were given awards by the Dutch and also by the Lifeboat Institute, the Royal National Lifeboat Institute. So these are the men, and superimposed an image of the Royal Lifeboat, National Lifeboat Institute bravery or medal. I couldn't find a good copy of a medal from the Dutch authorities. And this is a memorial which it was erected a few years back, and again a close-up of the medal. So they're still, these men and the heroic actions of the lifeboat men are still commemorated in the west coast of Ireland. I think that memorial's on Tory Island, but I'm sure someone will correct me if I'm wrong in that. So the first fatalities, the Dutchmen were all in essence civilians. They didn't die in enemy action, but they were part of a convoy. The fact that the headstones record that they died in the service of their fatherland, to me, is sufficient to qualify them as war fatalities in the more general sense of the word. So moving on to men who are more directly identifiable as being war fatalities. The first one is Cornelius Hoss, who was born on 19th November 1909 at Bentheim in Duitsland to Adrianus Hoss and Altsje de Geus, and he married Johanna Frederica van Duben on 15th June 1932 at Sexbierum in Friesland. Lieutenant Commander Cornelius Hoss was serving with the Royal Netherlands Naval Aviation Service on HNLMS Tjerk-Hiddes, which had formerly been HMS Nonpareil. It was a British warship which was then transferred into the Royal Dutch Naval Service. HNLMS is the Dutch equivalent of HMS. He died of self-inflicted gunshot wounds on board ship at sea on 15th July 1942, aged 33, and is buried in Londonderry City Cemetery. We don't know the exact circumstances, don't know whether he had received bad news from home, because obviously his homeland was under German occupation. Fleet Air Arm 1847 Squadron was formed at the Royal Naval Air Station at Eglinton in County Londonderry in February 1944 and was equipped with Grumman Hellcat aircraft, which are depicted on the slide. Sorry, there's just a couple of people who are in the waiting room, so it's just clicking them in. The squadron, which contained a number of men from the Royal Netherlands Naval Aviation Service, lost almost half its men to training accidents over a 3-month period in 1944. Some sources place the blame on the commanding officer for having an over-rigorous approach to training. I'm not enough of an expert to comment on that. 3 Dutch airmen were buried in the graveyard at St. Canice Church of Ireland at Eglinton. Johannes Bloch was born on 14th November 1919 at Jakarta in the Dutch East Indies and served as a second lieutenant aviator with 1847 Squadron. On 27th March 1944, he died when his Grumman Hellcat aircraft crashed at Tully-Brislin near Eglinton, following a collision with another Hellcat aircraft during formation flying. He was 24 years old and he was buried at Eglinton. After the war, his body was exhumed and reinterred in Nieuwe Oosterbeekgraafplaats Cemetery in Amsterdam. A memorial plaque in the Eglinton graveyard commemorates the exhumation, and I've also then shown the headstone in the cemetery in Amsterdam. You can see that it records that he died at Greysteel, Northern Ireland. Eric Hendrik den Hollander was born on 29 September 1922 at Bandung in the Dutch East Indies to Hendrik Gerrit den Hollander and Magdalena Brugman. Flying officer Eric Hendrik den Hollander died at the age of 21 when his Grumman Hellcat crashed into a cornfield at Lochmagary near Ballymena on 28 April 1944, again during formation flying. The aircraft narrowly missed the farmhouse of the McCarroll family, and the Air Force recovery team found Eric den Holder's body in the field behind the house. He had been badly burned in the fatal accident, and his body was wrapped in his parachute and taken from the scene. The undercarriage landed 20 feet from the farmhouse, and it took several days for the Air Force personnel to dig out the deeply embedded wreckage and to clear the surrounding area. Hendrik Christian de Jager was born on 27 February 1918 at Tilburg in Noord-Brabant, and he was a second lieutenant aviator. He was 25 years old when he died, when his Grumman Hellcat crashed into Lochfoyle after colliding with another Grumman Hellcat aircraft on 18th May 1944. So these men were dying in 1944. They were training to be part of the invasion of mainland Europe. But there was so much formation flying practice that I don't know whether there was an element of weariness or what, but or maybe the formations were being kept too close together. But the number of accidents that happened where aircraft obviously collided with other aircraft for whatever reason resulted in the loss of 3 men's lives, possibly unnecessarily so. This is the SS Arundora Star, which was built in 1927 as an ocean liner and refrigerated cargo ship. She was converted into a purely cruise ship in 1929. She was owned by the Blue Star Line when she was requisitioned as a troop ship at the start of the Second World War. On 2nd July 1940, she set sail for Liverpool to transport Italian and German civilian internees and a small number of prisoners of war to Canada. There was also a complement of 200 British soldiers on board to act as guards. Although where the soldiers would have been trying to escape to is beyond me, but in case they tried to take over the ship or something like that. Excluding the crew, there were 1,400 people on board the ship when she was sunk by a German U-boat, U-47, off the coast of Ireland, with the loss of at least 105 or 805 lives. Bodies were washed up along the western and northern coasts of Ireland, the western seaboard of Scotland, and as far away as the Outer Hebrides. This simple Commonwealth War Graves style of headstone is in a graveyard on Rathlin Island. The body of Giuseppe Capella, who was an Italian civilian, an internee, was washed ashore at Westlight on Rathlin Island on 10th of August 1940. So nearly 6 weeks after the sinking. And he was buried in the St. Thomas Church of Ireland graveyard 2 days later. Giuseppe Capella was born on 13th April 1885 at Borgatoro, and he married Rosina Lazzi, sometimes spelt as Lazzi. They were living at Calthorpe Street in the St. Pancras area of London with their son Arthur, who was 18, and Rosina's brother. Giuseppe was a hotel porter and waiter when he was interned and was 55 years old when he died. Probate granted effects of £517 and 10 shillings to Rosina. And amazingly, this equates to nearly £31,000 in current terms. So obviously being a hotel porter and waiter was a money earner in those days. So he's the only civilian war fatality of enemy action to be buried in Ulster, or to be currently buried in Ulster. 3 Norwegian merchant seamen died during the Second World War in Belfast and are buried in Belfast City Cemetery. Their headstones are fairly unique, I think, in that they have this embossed brass anchor embedded into the top of the headstone. And as you can see, underneath the small black cross, it has For Norge, which means for Norway. So again, they were regarded as having died for Norway in the 1939-1945 war. John Janssen was born on 9th January 1912 and was a seaman on MV Helgory, part of convoy HX 159, which was towed into Belfast Lock after an engine room explosion. He drowned at Dufferin Dock in Belfast on 13th December 1941, aged 29. His last known address was Haraldsgate in Haugesund, Norway, and he left a widow and 3 children. Carl Trygve Karlsson was born on 23rd October 1889 at Stavanger in Norway to Carl Johan Larsson and Trina Marie Karlsson, and he married Ragnar Rasmussen on 20th October 1917 at Stavanger. He was chief engineer on SS Ishbourne when he drowned at Queen's Quay in Belfast on 20th December 1941, aged 42. For those of you who are wondering why his surname was Karlsson when his father's surname was Larsson, in the Scandinavian, Norwegian, Icelandic tradition, a son's surname is his father's forename with the word son at the end. So because Carl Larsson was his father, Carl was given the surname Karlsson, which just happened to be the same as his mother's maiden name. Confused? You most certainly will be. The third of the Norwegian seamen was Halvard Arnesen Haljem. Again, there's various spellings of his surname. And he was born on 26th February 1897 at Sonderled in Norway to Arne Halvardsen Haljem and Tora Lichtrang, who later lived at Vestre Aker in Oslo. He married Ingeborg Alvilda Christiansen on 28th March 1923 at Gamle Aker in Oslo, and they had 1 child before the marriage was dissolved. Halvard Arnesen Haljem was second mate on DJ Halsmar vessel when he died in an onboard accident at Prince's Dock in Belfast on 6th December 1942 at the age of 45. Which brings us on to the final batch, which are the Polish nationals who died during the Second World War in Northern Ireland. They were all airmen, and they died in a mixture of accidents. And I've got the website for Your Freedom and Ours just below the 3 headstones that you can see in this picture. They're doing some fantastic work in terms of setting out trails for where the accidents occurred, erecting small memorials at the various crash sites, and also taking part in educational projects with local communities to let people have a greater understanding of Polish affairs and the Polish association with Northern Ireland in particular. There have been instances of anti-Polish aggression, mainly in Belfast, with the number of Polish migrants coming to Northern Ireland for employment. And this project is aiming to try and sort of counteract the misconceptions about Polish people. 15 Polish airmen died, and they're buried in 5 different graveyards in Northern Ireland. 1 died in 1940, 3 in 1942, and 11 in 1943. And a lot of the information in this portion of the talk comes from Scott Edgar's Wartime NI website. I've also mentioned the Polish Society in Northern Ireland that's involved in various shared history projects and has developed the Polish Wings Heritage Trail. In this segment, I will be using the British rank terms, and again, apologies in advance for the mispronunciation of names and places. Francis Józef Pretkiewicz was born on 9th July 1914 in Poland, or what is now later Poland, to Józef Pretkiewicz and Gertruda. He arrived in Northern Ireland on 11th October 1940 and was posted to 245 Squadron, which was stationed at RAF Aldergrove. He made a total of 4 operational sorties with the squadron before his untimely death. On 30th November 1940, Sergeant Pretkiewicz was flying a Hawker Hurricane in a training exercise when the aircraft's engine failed. Pretkiewicz bailed out of the stricken fighter plane, only for his parachute to become entangled on the tail. This caused the plane to spin out of control and come down on high ground near Cushendall. Francis Józef Pretkiewicz was 26 years old and is buried in Glenavy Roman Catholic Graveyard in County Antrim. In December 1984, a team of volunteers from the Ulster Aviation Society recovered the Merlin engine of the aircraft from the crash site. Joseph Antoni Pudelko was born on 13th December 1918 to Antoni Pudelko and Katarina Pudelko. After escaping from Poland, he served with the RAF's 309 Polish Squadron before being transferred to No. 6 Anti-Aircraft Cooperation Unit. Flight Sergeant Pudelko was the pilot of a Westland Lysander aircraft, which crashed shortly after takeoff from RAF Sydenham on 23rd April 1942. Flight Sergeant Norman Elcock of the Royal Air Force Volunteer Reserve died in the same incident on the same flight. Joseph Pudelko was 23 years old and is buried in Milltown Roman Catholic Cemetery in Belfast. His rank is recorded on the headstone as KPL, which is the contraction for Capral, which in English would be corporal. Edvard Lewandowski was born on 2nd September 1919 at Grodku in Russia and served, what was then Russia, and served as a corporal with 6th Anti-Aircraft Cooperation Unit. He died when a Westland Lysander aircraft from RAF Sydenham hit a balloon cable and crashed at Belfast Lough on 30th April 1942. So the balloon cable would have been anti-aircraft measures. Edvard Lewandowski was 22 years old, and he too is buried in Milltown Roman Catholic Cemetery. Henry Komenda was born on 13th January 1920 at Seelek and served as a corporal with number 1480 Anti-Aircraft Cooperation Flight, which was flying with 256 Squadron and was stationed at Newtonards Airfield. He died when a Bolton Paul Defiant aircraft crashed at Ballycarry on 9th July 1942. He was 22 years old and is buried in Movilla Cemetery in Newtownards. Air Gunner Peter Charles Hunter Phillips of the RAF died in the same incident. So a lot of the squadron's flights would have contained a mixture of British personnel and Polish personnel. .315 Squadron, which was a Polish squadron and was known as the City of Dublin Squadron, was equipped with Supermarine Spitfire aircraft and was stationed at RAF Ballyhalbert in County Down, and 4 pilots died in a 45-day period in the autumn of 1943. This is going to be the most difficult one for me to pronounce. Jędrzej Richard Tukhemsky, I'm going to call him Richard Tukhemsky from now on, was born on 7th April 1919 at Warsaw and served as a second lieutenant with 315 Squadron. He died when his aircraft crashed near Ballymena on 22nd August 1943. He was 24 years old and is buried in Mount St. Joseph Roman Catholic Churchyard at Ballycranbeg on the Ards Peninsula. On 11th September 1943, 3 Supermarine Spitfires took off from RAF Ballyhalbert on a formation flying training exercise. They got separated in bad weather and each plane crashed, resulting in 2 fatalities. The fatalities were buried in Mount St. Joseph Roman Catholic Churchyard on 14th September, following a high mass at Ballyhalbert Airfield. Stanislaw Grodomsky was born on 11th April 1909 and was a warrant officer with 315 Squadron. He was the senior pilot on the formation flying training exercise, which left RAF Ballyhalbert. He was 34 years old when he crashed his Spitfire aircraft on Plantation Road near Lisburn. Vladislav Kolek was born on 2nd July 1917 and was posted as a flight sergeant to 315 Squadron on 9th September 1943. 2 days later, at the age of 26, he was killed when he crashed his Spitfire aircraft at Ballygutowag Hill near Belfast whilst trying to fly to Nuts Corner Airfield. Obviously, with the weather conditions, he knew he was in trouble. He knew that the closest airfield to where his flying location was Nuts Corner, and in trying to get to Nuts Corner, he crashed into Ballygutowag Hill, which is not far from Cave Hill. Andrew Henrik Flager was born on 21st December 1912 at Auchennew, and he was a sergeant with 315 Squadron. He died at the age of 30 when his Supermarine Spitfire crashed near Ballyhalbert Airfield during a training exercise on 5th October 1943. He was 30 years of age and is buried in Movilla Cemetery in Newtownards. Vladislav Eugenius Heller was born on 27th June 1895, and he had served in the Great War with the Austrian Army. He was a wing commander with 3 Air Observers Navigation School, and he died when an Avro Anson aircraft from RAF Squiresgate near Blackpool crashed into Knocklade Mountain near Ballycastle during a navigational training exercise on 18th October 1943. He was 48 years old and is buried in Movilla Cemetery in Newtownards. So there's 3 Polish graves side by side in Movilla Cemetery. It's in the Roman Catholic segment of that graveyard. In 1943, 304 Polish Squadron was stationed at RAF Prendanak in Cornwall and was operating under Coastal Command. On 20th December 1943, one of the squadron's Vickers Wellington aircraft was returning from an anti-submarine patrol when it crashed at Mount Brandon in County Kerry during a snowstorm. The crew of 6 flight sergeants were killed, and their recovered bodies were transported to the border by the Irish authorities on 22nd December. The 6 Polish airmen were buried in Milltown Roman Catholic Cemetery on 27th December, with men from 303 Polish Squadron from Ballyhalbert acting as coffin bearers. So although the squadron was based in England, they were buried in Northern Ireland. Klemens Adamovich was born on 25th April 1911 at Zamość, and he was the pilot of the aircraft. He was 32 years old when he died. Stanislaw Chemevsky was born on 14th February 1918 at Potokol, and he was the co-pilot. He was 27 years old when he died. Pavel Kovalevich was born on 9th February 1917 at Piaski Star, and he was the wireless operator on the flight. He was 26 years old when he died. Kazimir Lugovsky was born on 20th July 1920, and he was an air gunner, 23 years old when he died. Vincenti Pietrzak, my apologies, was born on 25th July 1916, and he too was an air gunner on the flight. He was 27 years old when he died. And the final one is a bit of an anomaly. Naftali Hirsch Pavel Kuflik was born on 4th January 1923 at Cologne in Germany to Polish parents with German ancestry. Pavel Kuflik was the navigator and was 20 years old when he died. His body was exhumed from his grave in Milltown Roman Catholic Cemetery, and was reinterred in Carnmoney Jewish Cemetery near Belfast on 21st June 1944. It's difficult to understand how the authorities did not realize at the time of their death that Pavel Kuflik was Jewish, whilst the remaining 5 members of his aircrew were Roman Catholics. So he was buried in a Roman Catholic graveyard, even though he was Jewish. 6 months later, he was exhumed and reburied in, as I said, in Carnmoney Jewish Cemetery. And if you just look at that face, he doesn't even look to be 20. He looks to me like he's about 16 or 17. That, ladies and gentlemen, brings the formal part of this talk to an end. As usual, I'll be available to answer any questions, but please don't ask me about pronunciations.
Thanks a million, Nigel. That was brilliant, as always. There's a couple of questions coming in, but if anyone else has any other questions, just just in relation to, just going back to say the ships and vehicles there, just in relation to the protection of the vessels, and whether anyone has ever documented and researched the fatalities, either naval, military, or civilian.
From the Arundora Star?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's something which I've always had the back of my mind, that I would like to do a tour which would visit all of the graveyards where the fatalities were buried, because it would be handy to have a ship as well to do it, because, as I said, they're buried, I think, from County Clare, County Mayo, right the way through Donegal, one buried in Rathlin, and then there's others buried, as I said, as far as the Isle of Lewis and the Outer Hebrides. So it's a really extensive sort of site of burials. And those were just the men who were recovered, or the bodies that were recovered. Many of the bodies wouldn't have been recovered. Obviously, Commonwealth war graves would have details of the British naval, Marines and army personnel. But as regards the the internees and the German prisoners of war. We just don't know all their names, I don't think. And it's also, there's an element of, what's the right word? There's an anomaly in that the ship was unescorted. So it's transporting German and Italian internees to Canada, but it didn't have a naval escort. But also, from what I've read in some accounts, it wasn't identifiable as carrying internees. So obviously the German U-boat commander just saw that there was a ship. It was an armed merchant cruiser, or it was certainly armed, and that to him was justification for sinking her, not knowing that in doing so he was dooming many hundreds of German civilians and some German military. I do know that a couple from Northern Ireland have visited a number of the graveyards in Ireland relating to the Arundora Star and had made short videos at each of them. I think Gavin had posted details of some of the videos on the History Hub Ulster website and on the Facebook page. But it would certainly be a nice epitaph to them to finally get a concise list of all the people. I know that there was one, there was at least one, some of the German internees were Jewish, and one of them died and was buried in County Donegal. His body was subsequently exhumed, and it was buried along with German soldiers in a cemetery in Era, which again, okay, the person's dead, but burying a Jewish person next to soldiers of the Third Reich is a bit inconsiderate, maybe. So I think it's an area, it's a tragedy that's worth exploring. I just don't have the time to do it.
Yeah, I think Michael's had his hand up there to ask a question, and you're unmuted there, Michael, so if you want to ask away.
Did I? Oh, sorry. I had some strange things flashing up on the laptop, so I didn't know. But it was very, very interesting, Nigel, as always. And I have looked around one or two of the graves myself, so you've given me a lot of insight. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a
question there.
Yeah, we have a comment/question here from Martin Allen. So he's saying the Carlson tradition, similar to Scottish, of Mac, meaning son of originally humans. So he's wondering if there any traditional connection, obviously, between Scotland and say Scandinavia, and then was the Hellcat a widowmaker plane generally in operation across the Allies?
Right, I better have a look at that because
it's probably easier if you read it.
Certainly, there's a lot of Scandinavian connection to Scotland, as indeed there is to Ireland, obviously. But certainly, when you look at places like Shetland, Orkney, and lots of the Highland Islands, there's a strong Scandinavian connection. But it's also very similar to the Celtic tradition of like O'Neill being the son of Neil, or Nick being used for daughter. And in the Scandinavian tradition, the daughter would take the father's forename with Dottir added on to the end of it. So Carlson's sister would have been Karl's Dottir, and that's still very prevalent in Iceland. So yes, I think there is a lot of intermerging, because a lot of the Western Isles of Scotland were conquered by the Vikings, by the Norsemen. Somerled, who was one of the sort of the high lords that looked over the islands, was of Norwegian extraction. So you do have that connection, and obviously with the Norwegians and Danes populating the eastern coast of Ireland, right the way down as far as sort of Wexford and Waterford, I think you do have that very strong connection. But I think it's just a generic thing that happens within the sort of the Celtic groupings of peoples. to a certain extent, the Norwegians and Scandinavians fall into that, because if you look at a lot of the Scandinavian artwork, the intricacies of Scandinavian artwork is very similar to the Celtic artwork that you see on high crosses and so forth. Not sure if that's answered the question, but hello from Cyprus, where it's been nice and sunny. Go away.
Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. If you know, that's just Anne-Marie there, Marianne even. Greetings from Galway City in the west coast of Ireland. You're not that far from where some of the Arundora Star fatalities would be buried. It's Marianne, not Anne-Marie. Thank you, Peter. Nigel, just asked about protection of the vessel, blah, blah. No, not answering that question. Carlson tradition. Was the Hellcat a Widowmaker plane generally in operation across the Allies? And were there any safety concerns with it? I've got a very short answer to that. I don't know. It's Second World War is not a big thing for me. Doing this talk was actually a very, very big step into the unknown for me. If you want to find out more about the Hellcat and sort of its safety record, if you try to access Scott Edgar's wartimeni.com website, and contact him, he may be able to give you some information. I just know that within one squadron, there were a lot of accidents involving Hellcat aircraft, but whether it was down to an intrinsic fault with the aircraft, or whether it's because the formation flying, they were just being made to fly too close together or to carry out maneuvers which were too intricate, unnecessarily intricate. But again, I don't know enough about that. It's easy to forget when you go abroad, your generation weren't the first to move around Europe, dead right. Do you have religious segregation in graveyards in Northern Ireland? This has never occurred to me. In essence, yes, no. There's a lot of graveyards which are owned by Roman Catholic churches, and in those graveyards, it would be Roman Catholics buried there. There's a lot of graveyards owned by the various denominations within Protestant tradition, and they would be occupied by Protestants. Milltown Roman Catholic Cemetery would obviously be Roman Catholic, except for the odd Polish person. But Belfast City Cemetery, Dundonald Cemetery, Carnmoney Cemetery, Derry City Cemetery, all those large cemeteries, there would be interspersing of Catholic and Protestant graves. There are some graveyards where there is a specific segment for Roman Catholic dead, but that's more because of the requirements of the Roman Catholic Church than an imposed segregation, policy of segregation. I do know that Belfast City Cemetery still has an underground wall which separated the Protestant burials from the Roman Catholic burials. Although what that was supposed to achieve, I just really do not know. Excellent research and presentation as ever, Nigel. Well done. Not clear off, Peter. Must be looking at free coffee. Okay. Yeah, a lot of the photographs I nicked from other websites, and my apologies to anyone who I nicked it from. Johnny Doyle asked about the Norwegian graves. I'm not sure who maintains them, but I do know in preparing for this, I went up to give them a bit of a clean, and one of them is in a not a precarious situation, but it does wobble a bit if you lean against it. But I'm not sure who maintains them, whether they're looked after by Belfast City Council. Certainly the grounds around them would be looked after by the cemetery staff at Belfast City Cemetery. But who would be responsible for ensuring that the actual stones are maintained? I don't know. They may come under the auspices of the Commonwealth War Graves because they're in this sort of area, and it's easier, rather than having somebody coming from Norway to check them, to have them checked by the local rep for the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, but it's an answer which, I mean, whenever I was up and I noticed that one of them was a bit wobbly, I was thinking to myself, who should I be contacting here to let them know? Because I don't want it falling and shattering. It doesn't really come across in the photographs I had, but it seems to be a layered type of stone. So I would say that if it fell over, it would shear not laterally, but down the face of the stone itself. So I don't know who to go to or to take that up with. When a body was exhumed, was there any kind of special procedure applied, family opposition, or did a family push for it to happen in the case of the Jewish fella? In the case of the Jewish fella, I don't know, because his family, from what I understand, the family moved from Germany into Holland, and it was in Holland that that he joined up with the Polish Air Force, or left to come to UK to join the Polish Air Force. So I don't know whether his family were still in Holland. I don't know whether they survived the war. I think it was a military, that somebody in the military discovered, oh, hang on, this guy's Jewish, he's buried in Roman Catholic cemetery. So they decided to move him. Obviously, they would have had to have got permission from the local Hebrew congregation in Belfast to inter him in the Carnmoney cemetery. As regards to exhumation, I think there would have needed to have been some sort of a civil procedure, an application submitted. I mean, they couldn't just go and say, right, we're going to dig this body up and take it back to Holland. Sorry for being a bit facetious. So I think there would have been some sort of a civil procedure where the Dutch military would have had, for example, would have had to have made an application to exhume the body from the graveyard up in County Londonderry, for example, and to take it for Holland. The fact that so many of them were not exhumed and returned home, in fact, only one of the Dutchmen buried here was subsequently exhumed. The three men who were buried out in County Donegal, that would be a different scenario, because again, I would assume there would be some sort of a similar civic procedure for the Republic of Ireland with regards to body exhumations, and whether that would require family approval, I don't know. But I'm assuming that most people, if their loved one, if their member of their family died overseas, if it was possible for the body to be brought back to where they lived, in terms of being able to visit the grave and so forth, the families would want the bodies returned. But as to the exact nature of any procedures, I really do. In fact, for some of them, I can't even find out. For example, the Belgian guy, I can't find out whether he was exhumed, because the cemetery records have details of his burial and the location of his burial, but they don't have details of the exhumation. It may be somewhere in their filing system, but it's just not connected to the burial details. I'm just assuming that he's been exhumed because the grave marker just refers to 3 other men. Right, that seems to have exhausted the questions and also got rid of a lot of the people that were attending have decided to go away and have a cup of tea and lie down in a quiet room. Many thousands, again, Stephen McCracken, Tam Lachdard COI in McGilligan has a grave to a Norwegian sailor who was washed up in McGilligan Strand. There was a memorial service to him a few years ago with the ambassador and his dignitaries. Didn't know that, Stephen. Is there I'll contact you to find out if there's a headstone. Was he a war? If Stephen, are you still there? Yeah. Stephen, unmute yourself. He's gone to sleep.
Only half sleeping.
I thought you maybe were way off seeing what how much damage Atletico Madrid were doing.
No, I've lost. No, I'm not bothered that tonight. Seen the first goal and tuned out.
Right. Is this guy Norwegian up at McGilligan Strand? Was he a war fatality?
As far as I know, there's a big project done on him a few years ago. I think the Norwegian ambassador came over, and a whole chair of other people came over, and they had a big service to him. The gravestone, it is a headstone, is there, and it says an unnamed Norwegian soldier
Right.
washed up.
Is it the same type of headstone as the ones I showed for the ones in Belfast?
No, I don't think so.
Right.
But I just can't remember it probably. I'll be able to find it online and send it to you.
Right. Could you? Because if it is war related, then obviously even though he's, say again, the unknown ones, so far I've tried to steer away from including them because you can't include any details. You've got no names. You can't produce any additional family information. Sorry, that Johnny Doyle's come back. Right. Yeah. I was aware. I was in contact with a Norwegian war graves or war society or website that looked at people who had died with the merchant navy mainly. Okay. Sorry. Anything else anyone wants to add? No.
We're done.
We're
that was
done.
Fantastic, Nigel,
Oh
as
God!
always.
I must have put them all to sleep.
Not at all, no. Again, another enlightening piece of our history here in Northern Ireland and in the southern counties as well. I think we're going to, over the next couple of months and years, we're going to find out an awful lot more details in regards to World War II as records become more available online and that. So
yeah. It's so difficult researching, especially if somebody dies in Ireland.
Yeah, yeah.
Now down south, in the Republic of Ireland, in the Irish Free State,
yeah.
You can access the death registers. In Northern Ireland, we have to pay to access those, which is scandalous. But for example, there's some of those guys, because bodies were maybe from the Arundora Star were maybe washed up in Donegal, there would sometimes be the death register entry, which would give details of whereabouts the bodies were washed up. And similarly with a lot of the British naval people and military people who died at sea, bodies washed up and were maybe buried in Derry City Cemetery or elsewhere in Northern Ireland. Having those details on the Irish genealogy website where you can access the death registers, it tells you sometimes, whether the person was washed up in the morning or the afternoon, the name of the bay or the strand or whatever, and all of that information is valuable. But for a lot of the ones I'm looking at, I can maybe identify from newspaper reports which hospital they died at, but it doesn't necessarily tell me of the circumstances of the death, and especially where people had died after discharge. To me, it would be interesting to know whether they died of pneumonia or whether they died of wounds or whether they died of some illness that was connected to their war service. And it's very frustrating with Second World War ones to not have the same level of information available. I just can't wait for them to start releasing some of that stuff.
Yeah, hopefully in time. Anyway, listen, thanks a million, Nigel, as always.
No problem. Thank you very much for having me again.
So we shall chat to you again soon. And thanks to everyone for attending.
Okay, thanks, folks.
Go up online in the next short while, so be available for people to rewatch and share. So thanks again.
Thank you. Bye.